Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This video is brought to you by First Detachment Nutrition. Battle tested, expert formulated. Use discount code AB10 at checkout for 10% off. All right, folks, Big Paul here today with my friend Kurt Havens, a research scientist, and we're going to dig into some science behind Trenbolone today. Everybody's favorite, Tren. What's up, Kurt?
What's going on?
Nothing much, man. I figured you're way smarter than me, man, when it comes to this stuff. So I figured I'd get somebody more intelligent than me to come on and talk about the science behind Tren. And bros are obsessed with Tren. So I figured we'd peel the layers of the onion back and go for a deep dive and talk about Tren.
Sure. Well, hopefully we can talk about stuff that's not already been talked about before a million times.
Well, it never hurts to rehash things. There's so many myths and bro sciencey stuff out there about Tren, and I have a love-hate relationship with Tren. For people that know me, I like the way it makes me look. I don't like the way that it makes me feel.
Pretty common.
And that's been my experience to it. I'm blown away by dudes now that just run it year round and run high doses of it. It's bewildering to me. I've never really found it to be that productive of an off season or size drug for size, and we can get we can talk about the reasons for that. But I feel like it gets my metabolism ramped up too much, and my appetite just goes to shit if I try to run higher doses of it. It's great for prep, but I have not found it to be that productive in an off-season phase.
When it's not, I mean, the gist of it's not stimulating protein synthesis. You know what I mean? It's just stopping protein breakdown at any reasonable dose that you would run.
So it's more of an anti-catabolic, I guess, would be.
Yeah. So it's just not going to, it's not going to drive protein expression in something like nandrolone would, or even testosterone.
Yeah, and that's a point that I don't think guys fully understand. There is a crowd that talks about all steroids sort of have similar rates of muscle protein synthesis, and there is an upper limit on how much protein synthesis you can generate in a given period of time. Anyway, we know that, but I have found nandrolone to be the most productive in the off season for adding size.
Yeah, I mean, or even a testosterone base, right?
Yeah, and recently I've been just running testosterone and primobolan, and that seems to be the best for me. I found it is the best compromise of least amount of side effects with best outcomes as far as adding mass for me, at least from what I've seen.
And we should probably do one on primobolan at some point too, because I feel like that's a really misunderstood, right?
So let's talk. Yeah, it is. I think a lot of gym bros associate the side effects that you get with Trenbolone with it being stronger and somehow being more productive. It does have unique attributes that we leverage on contest prep, such as the glucocorticoid suppression and things like that.
Right.
that are when you're in a highly stressed state. But let's talk about the history of it. Give us some background on Trenbolone.
So. There was a scientist, doctor named A.J. Birch, who was out of Oxford in London in the 50s and 60s. And I'm not exactly sure what he was looking for, but he created something called the Birch reduction. It became named after him. And basically, they were removing a methyl group on testosterone, and he discovered the 19-nors. And there's 7 common, but I want to say there's 27 total derivatives that make up the 19-nor category. The majority of them have never really been used for anything. They were kind of shelved. Trestolone is actually a good example. So trestolone was one of those meant, and it was shelved for a long time until they went back and looked at it. But Trenbolone was one of them. Nandrolone is obviously the biggest one that's still being used today medically. And I would say he wasn't changing things specifically to look for an outcome. He was just seeing what would work. Okay. And obviously Trenbolone came out of that. And then they did a lot of really early experiments on men, on women, on pregnant women. These studies aren't really like public knowledge stuff at this point. Obviously for like ethical reasons. they used to use nandrolone a lot on women in the 60s. And
what was the therapeutic reason for using nandrolone on women or Tren?
well, it actually has a lot of benefits. So it doesn't create the same like hemipoietic effects, as testosterone. They thought nandrolone would be less virilizing. Tren turned out to be slightly more. Obviously, Tren is not female friendly at all.
No.
But they ran trials anyway just to see what it would do. Obviously, that didn't have very good outcomes on that one. Nandrolone, though, has been used successfully in women.
Yeah, don't tell the female professional female bodybuilding scene that trenbolone shouldn't be used by women.
Yeah,
I know
really.
it's commonly deployed.
Yeah. So and this was kind of the birth of. He was kind of like the grandfather of that whole era when steroids were then being experimented with, right? So then I want to say Searle Laboratories in the United States then came out with another 1,000 derivatives of testosterone around that same time, based on what he was doing. And this was kind of like where the term SARM came from, right? I think you and I have talked about this before. So they're considered steroidal SARMs because of their interaction with the androgen receptor, versus the SARMs that most people today think of are more of like a non-steroidal.
Non-steroidal SARM. Don't tell the bros that steroids are actually SARMs. It makes their heads explode.
And the ones, not to insult anyone, but the ones that I would say that you would buy, gray market ones are pretty much the junk that was left on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
That there was really no pharmaceutical use for, versus like, a nandrolone or whatever, obviously has some use. So, what else about trenbolone do you want to know early on? So then it became human grade and basically animal grade around the same time, all the way until the 70s. It's, and it was studied very heavily, and it ran as a human grade as parabolin all the way until 1996. And it's stated as trenbolone acetate, obviously in cattle. It's still currently used and owned by Merck now.
And what was the therapeutic use for parabolin?
It was used for, they were trying to use it for hormone replacement therapy. And
oh, wow.
So like osteoporosis and things like that. So it, in a lot of ways, the crazy thing is there's probably as many studies, at least in men, showing that it has benefits versus testosterone, as there are studies showing that it's more harmful than testosterone. So some of this stuff is kind of debatable. I think where it's used in bodybuilding, though, is push the dose way higher than what it was ever intended, right? What was the standard parabolin dose in bodybuilding? It was like 3 amps a week or something.
Yeah, it was like 2 amps, 3 amps a week, which
You're
was
talking about 100 to 150 milligrams total a week, right?
Right.
And I think that the ester that we use in parabolin too also, was obviously a lot longer than acetate, and it controlled a lot of the side effects. So we talked about why acetate is used in animals and why it seems to be a stronger drug. So I think that there's a lot of misconception too about esters and it changing the parent hormone, right? I think it's a two-sided thing. I don't think that the ester itself, it's like you putting on dress shoes and trying to run and you putting on running shoes and trying to run. It doesn't change your feet, but you run a lot faster in running shoes. So
right.
Acetate doesn't change the trenbolone molecule, but it changes the way it works a little bit. And I think that this is where that's a more beneficial drug than the longer stuff, right? So the enanthate that's replaced parabolin now, and that a lot of that's based on different responses that occur in the body with the faster release. So you have there's prostaglandin responses. We can get into this stuff if you.
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about that a little bit, the prostaglandin response.
So the common, right, one of the most common things with trenbolone acetate is that cough, right?
The Tren cough.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's basically like a microembolism that you've caused by puncturing a vein when you inject it. And because of the fast ester, it enters the bloodstream really quickly. And your body releases these prostaglandins, which try to constrict, your airway to try to, control the drug from entering your lungs. That exact prostaglandin response is also what causes stem cells to proliferate. So that's kind of some of the magic that's in Tren. You don't find in other drugs. And it's also why in cattle currently they use acetate with a polymer attached to slow the release versus just using a long ester tren. They've noticed the growth is much greater in cattle. Because
yeah, and I know, don't they also administer estrogen with the cattle too as part of the...
So, again, there's as many studies to show, again, in cattle that trenbolone alone works just as well versus trenbolone with estradiol. But I guess the consensus is that it's still a better response overall, most likely due to IGF response from the estradiol. The same as like you would never have a human take tren alone without some sort of estrogen base, right? Like a testosterone.
Except on contest prep where you're burying estrogen.
Yeah, but I'm saying in general, right? You wouldn't choose to do that. That wouldn't be very advantageous to squash estrogen to nothing. And I think that's also where, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think that's also where a lot of the side effects come from, right? Because estrogen has a lot of protective effects in the body. Now with cattle, they're not so concerned with that. They're just concerned with maximum growth.
Yeah, they don't care if the cow feels like shit.
They're going to kill the cow anyway, so that doesn't make a difference. And in cattle, it's only used in steers. The steer has been fixed, standard is, at 2 weeks of age or earlier, or as early as 2 days, because it has much greater growth potential. If you give it to a bull that has intact hormones, they actually don't grow on it at all. And the muscle fibers, and because their muscle fibers have been basically reached the maximum potential from their own hormones, they're tougher, they're more glycolytic, a steer is more oxidative. It's just you wouldn't want to eat the meat from the bull if you didn't have to. But it's kind of interesting, right? Because I think there's the comparison where people want to compare Tren, or we'll say Revelar, which is the brand used in cattle. They always want to compare, well, a cow only gets 200 milligrams for the duration of this versus, these guys are taking 200 milligrams a day. Well, first of all, we're not cattle, right? So I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison. And most guys I know aren't fixed. So it is going to be a huge difference in response between, a steer and a human bodybuilder as far as, doses and effects.
Let's talk about the metabolites Tren is metabolized to.
That could be where some of the supposed progesterogenic effects come from, is from some of those metabolites. They might have more of an affinity for the progesterone receptor than Tren itself. We don't ever see progesterone side effects in animals, so that's mostly not the case. Where it's interesting is cows and rats metabolize Tren very differently. So when you read studies about effects, a lot of that is due to the way that they break them down, right? And humans are more similar to cattle when it comes to the metabolism, except there are polymorphisms that cause our metabolism sometimes to be more like a rat in that case.
The progesterone thing is interesting. I want to talk to you about that because I get a lot of guys that have fear of the progesterone, but it's like or prolactin and progesterone though. But I also, like, when I look at blood work, it seems to be like people will have really high progesterone levels, and then I don't know if the trend just shows up as progesterone on blood work or how that works, but like prolactin, like everybody's terrified of prolactin, and I almost never see high prolactin on blood work from trenbolone use.
Yeah, the progesterone, it's probably just showing up because it's a progesterone base, so it's getting cross detected. If you did like a pathology lab, like they would use for an autopsy, you'd actually see the trenbolone. Like if you look at Dallas McCarver's autopsy, you can actually see Tren in his blood. In the standard blood work that you and I get, it's just getting cross detected. It's not necessarily that it's causing a progesterogenic effect. The prolactin, you've never seen it it gets slightly elevated sometimes.
Yeah, like I don't see it like go crazy high. Like people think that it's going to like they proactively take things like Caber and stuff to try to prevent the progesterone from getting high. But I almost never see high progesterone on blood work. I see high prolactin. I mean, high prolactin. Sorry, but I see high progesterone all the time. But I never see high prolactin. Sorry, guys.
I mean, I've seen it where it's slightly elevated, never like maybe right at the top end.
Yeah, at the top end of like the normal range, but I don't see the couple instances where I've had people with severely high prolactin. It's because they've had a tumor.
Yeah, exactly, and you'd see that in like IGF levels too.
Yeah.
And Caber, obviously, I'm not a huge fan of cabergoline. I think it has a ton of other like cardiac effects that aren't really
Yeah,
so.
well, that it's the dopamine agonist withdrawal syndrome and
Yeah,
other nasty things.
I wouldn't really recommend that unless it was really needed. I think where people are missing it too. So what's causing if there's a prolactin elevation, prolactin can only get elevated in men from it'll follow estrogen up or it'll follow T3 down, right? So one of the neat functions of Tren is it lowers thyroid output. We can get more into that in a second. But by doing that, what it's doing is it's increasing prolactin slightly. And the prolactin actually aids in its androgen receptor binding. So by mitigating that effect, you're probably reducing the effectiveness of the Trenbolone.
So you're actually making the Tren work less.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that Tren in and of itself has this. It has a very high binding affinity to the AR, but the prolactin is aiding that effect, right? And that's also where we see some of the mistakenly people think that it's androgenic potential too, and a lot of that, your hair follicles have prolactin receptors as well. So if it's slightly elevated, it can also make your hair fall out. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an androgenic thing coming from Tren. It could be the prolactin as well.
Oh, okay. I never knew that. That was an interesting thing that I got into a sort of a semi debate about with another influencer, because I said the first time I took Tren, it absolutely melted my hair. I didn't have hair loss until I took Tren, and he was saying like it doesn't reduce, so it can't cause hair loss. I'm like, there was some mechanism in there, or maybe it was just a coincidence. I don't know.
No, and I mean, hair loss is like the $1 billion question, right? If anyone fully understood hair loss, they would
cure it.
So I think I keep meaning to do a post on hair loss. It's figuring out how to condense it for Instagram. I think where it's misunderstood is in a physiological state, right? In a normal natural man, DHT is going to be the largest thing with androgenic potential, right? Because It's converted, and your hair follicle happens to have a lot of that enzyme. So in a normal guy, that's what is going to affect their hair the most. The problem is any androgen can affect your hair.
Right.
Every androgen, even nandrolone. Technically, nandrolone itself is more androgenic than testosterone. What happens is it gets downregulated to dihydronandrolone very quickly, and that's less androgenic. That's why you don't want to take finasteride with nandrolone, because it'll reverse it and make your hair actually come out in clumps. But when it comes to hair loss, it's not always a DHT thing. You could completely block DHT and run Tren or whatever, and your hair will still come out. It's more about probably blocking the AR, right? Using something like RU58841 or something that's actually blocking the androgen receptor on the scalp. Not systemically. I wouldn't block it systemically. So that's kind of like a misnomer. It's not just DHT that's driving that effect. If someone is using steroids, it's a lot.
Yeah, and I thought that was an oversimplistic look at it. It was a debate I had with another guy, but I was always under the assumption that all androgens can cause androgenic alopecia. That just DHT is the primary driver of it.
Yeah, and if you took testosterone and you used finasteride and you took Trenbolone on top of it, your hair can still fall out.
Right.
You have no DHT. So that doesn't necessarily stop anything. No, you're 100% correct. It's not just a DHT thing.
Yeah, and can't absolutely bearing your sorry to get off on a hair loss rant here, but can't absolutely bearing your estrogen too, that can affect hair loss as well too, correct?
Oh yeah. I think any shift, then there's temporary shedding too. So any shift in hormones, even if someone starts using growth hormone, sometimes their hair falls out initially and then it'll come back, right? Any shift in your physiology can cause things like that. And the body's very sensitive to big changes. And also you see it with things like Masteron. Primobolan, you don't see it as much, but with Masteron's already reduced, so it's not even converting on the scalp. Masteron can make your hair fall out. It's probably one of the, in theory at least, it's supposedly one of the worst ones for hair. I don't know if that's really the case or not, but
yeah, the same guy was saying that Masteron can't make your hair fall out because it's already reduced, which I thought was incorrect.
But I'm saying, anything that attaches to the AR will attach to the AR on your hair follicles.
Correct.
The same thing. It doesn't make a difference, what it really is. It's based on, the problem is the people that study things like minoxidil aren't basing it on steroid users. They're basing it on normal physiology. So they're only looking at things like DHT. But even testosterone, even if you blocked DHT and you raised testosterone, so if you took a gram of testosterone and you block DHT, your hair can still fall out. Testosterone binds to the AR, not the same affinity as DHT, but it'll still bind. So,
yeah. So,
I mean, who knows?
So Trenbolone, let's talk about that. We were talking about thyroid. Trenbolone's impact on the thyroid earlier. Let's dig into that a little bit. I've noticed, like, when I do take Tren, and we talked about this a little bit the other day, you and I offline, but it definitely seems to have some effect on upregulating metabolism. I don't fully understand the mechanisms through which that happens, but it seems to me that it might be even a thermic uncoupler. From just how your body, how hot you get. Like, if I run the dose high enough, I'll run a mild grade fever when I'm on Tren.
So that's and it could be some
or
sort
it's
of
or it's the prostaglandins. I don't know.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So it's most likely the large majority of that is a prostaglandin response. So that's part of how you get a fever, is a prostaglandin response. Where I was going before with the thyroid, that's kind of fascinating, is even though it's reducing your thyroid slightly, it's not to say that it was designed this way. It's more of which came first, the chicken or the egg. I want to say the drug was designed and it just turned out this way. Cows have very fast metabolism, so the goal at least there was to feed them the same amount of food and have them yield more meat. So if you actually slow their metabolism down by lowering thyroid output a little bit, they'll actually be able to use the food more, right?
Right.
Like, I'm a naturally lean guy. You're my coach. You have to feed me a lot of food to make me grow.
Yeah.
So if you could feed me the same amount of food and yield the same amount of growth, it's brilliant, right? So that's where something like Tren would come in theory.
I remember the old Phenoplex inserts when we were converting them back in the day, but it said it literally says on the package, increases feed efficiency for
that's literally what it's designed for, right? So, and that's kind of the purpose there. So it will still, so what's perceived as speeding up your metabolism, the prostaglandin response and the fever. So fever is speeding up your metabolism, right? It's raising body temperature. It's thermogenic. So it's thermogenic through the prostaglandin response, and it's going to become more, feed efficient through slightly lowered, thyroid output, where it's basically you're able to use the nutrients instead of just burning them off or oxidizing them.
Yeah, I know a lot of coaches I'll see will throw T4 in with Tren as well. So I don't know if that sort of cancels some of that out.
I mean, I've heard of like 25 micrograms of T3 with it. I would use T4 with growth hormone more so, but maybe they're using both together.
Yeah.
Right, because we could do another thing on that. But in growth hormone, it's not necessarily one of the thyroid hormones. It's actually the enzymes that convert T4 to T3. That's what dictates how well growth hormone will work. So someone's response to growth hormone is basically based on that enzymatic activity.
Yeah, I remember seeing, like, on blood work, when people run Tren, they'll get low T3 uptake. You'll see on their
It's not really changing total T3 levels. It's like you said, it's really just changing the uptake of it. Right. So it's not squashing your metabolism. It's just changing the way the thyroid is working. Yeah,
and I thought, but yeah, I'll see the T3 uptake will be lower on blood work with people with that run Tren. I don't get that. My thyroid's always high, regardless.
Yeah, mine is as well. So, but that's at least the way it's used in cattle. So in humans, not necessarily the same thing, right? But yeah, but that's a lot of the perceived side effects from Tren are through that prostaglandin response, but that's also what's making it work better, right? So if you compared Trenbolone and Nanthate, like, I know you have that app that calculates like blood levels. Like if you did like Trenbolone and Nanthate and Trenbolone acetate, you would see a much higher peak on the acetate as well.
I know the standard protocol for contest prep is acetate. That's what people like to run on contest prep. It seems to be. The main reason I have people take acetate is in case you run into problems, you're not stuck with it forever too.
If you've used both, though, there's a relatively noticeable difference. And I think outside of the Nanthate being 20% weaker because of the weight of the ester, I think that there's just some effects you just aren't getting. You know what I mean? The pharmaceutical companies are very aware of the pharmacodynamics and kinetics of these things. And I think they generally know what they're doing, right? There's a reason why they choose certain esters for certain things. Like Masteron propionate was the preferred ester there, right? Because they want a high blood level of it fast, and they want to be able to remove it fast, but they're not looking for some sustained thing. And this is why, like, enanthate's a purely underground thing. Same with Trembolone, right? Like, we use Trembolone and enanthate for research. Like, it's made in labs for research only, and it's obviously made in underground labs for recreational use. But it's not typically the preferred, drug. And it's what you're talking about with, protein synthesis. That the theories that it might even be Derek from More Plates, More Dates that said something about that. With all steroids will yield the same amount of protein synthesis. That's not entirely correct, because you actually look at charts, right? Testosterone propionate yields less than testosterone enanthate as far as protein synthesis is concerned. And I don't think it's just
interesting. It's
not just a function of the dose. It's just its interaction with the human body, right? Like that's thermodynamics. Is just what your body does with the drug. And same with nandrolone. So nandrolone decanoate, right, holds 52 grams of nitrogen or something over 30 days versus, MPP is it's 2/3 of that or something. It's significantly less, right? So the same base chemical with a different ester will yield different effects sometimes. But you're not incorrect in saying that it doesn't change the chemical. It's still nandrolone. Right. Just the effect can be different. And this is probably why they choose, like, this nandrolone decanoate was chosen to use with wasting because there's a higher nitrogen retention and less frequent injections.
What is it specifically about Trembolone that you think causes improved body composition? Like, there just seems to be nothing that causes body composition changes like Tren. At least from what I've seen, it's almost mandatory for contest prep at this point.
So it's probably like a perfect storm. So it has a very high affinity and efficacy for the androgen receptor, right? So it's going to bind to androgen receptors in muscle and fat. So it's going to now cause gene response in muscle. It's going to cause the stronger something binds to an AR in your fat will cause more fat loss in theory, right? I hate using the term steroids will burn fat because it's true, but it's not true. You know what I mean? You understand what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
I don't think it's the correct use for a steroid. It's designed to build tissue in theory, not lose tissue. But so you have the AR effect, right? Then you have the nutrient partitioning effect, which is through thyroid output change. You have it interacts with glucocorticoids, so it's going to then reduce the catabolism from that and also reduce the subcutaneous water as well. So it's going to produce this a different look, that you can't really get with like testosterone. Is going to hold some minerals and stuff that you're just not going to get with Trembolone. It causes less blood volume than testosterone. So I think veins might be more pronounced because the thinner skin, so the less mineral retention. But I don't think like something like boldenone obviously is going to raise your blood volume dramatically. Primabon can do that as well. Have you ever seen that on labs with Primo?
Yeah, I have seen that on.
I mean, I don't think it's as bad as boldenone, but it does have a tendency to do that as well. What Trembolone doesn't do that and that was one of the reasons why Enegma was using it as Parabolin, is it just didn't have those same side effects, right? I think the most common occurrence in men using testosterone as replacement therapy is through raised hematocrit levels and stuff, and Trembolone really doesn't do that to the same effect.
Okay, I didn't know that.
That was used in monotherapy though. Again, so it's not so. When you and I see blood work with it used, it's generally used with testosterone, so you're still getting that same effect. You're missing that because Negma designed it to be used solo. Okay, so you were talking about and then obviously there's like estrogen stuff with Tren as well. So I would speculate that a lot of the mental side effects and mental or neurological outcomes that we see in studies from Tren use are probably at least partially mediated by estrogen. So they would be reduced if it was used in polypharmacy.
So we're actually using it in the worst possible time on contest prep when we're crushing our estrogen.
Crushing estrogen and then adding Tren to it. But I mean, what are you talking, 6 weeks? So
6 to 8 weeks, yeah.
I mean, I would question the sanity of any guy that would run it long term. I don't know why that would ever be done. Even in even in the presence of estrogen, we just don't know. It's not designed that way, right?
There
again, Parabolin was used long term, but the doses were stupidly low.
are tons of guys that use it year round. I know of.
Probably not the smartest thing.
Yeah, and the funny thing is like that I notice, and the people get angry about it, is the guys that are using it year round never get big. they're always like they're ripped, but they never get huge.
Well, it makes sense, right? I mean, just from it speeding your metabolism up to some extent, and also it not increasing protein synthesis, right? So all the studies show that its rate of protein synthesis is actually much lower than other stuff like testosterone. It's basically that balance of breakdown versus, stimulation. It's basically just throwing the breakdown way down. So you're basically netting positive, but it's not enough to really overcome or to push your weight up, like an Nandrolone would.
So that actually makes it a bad choice for off season.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the only times that I've seen that it made any sense or was advantageous is, again, not a recommendation, but I think in some of the very large bodybuilders where they've really had a genetic limit, right? I think it can be leveraged on top of other things in small amounts, perhaps to kind of shuttle a little bit more food, because they'd be using things like IGF and things on top of that as well, just to break your plateau. But I don't know if like the average guy that's 220, in a gym really needs to leverage that at that point. I'm talking like big Ramy stuff. There was probably a reason why he would have, again, I'm speculating that he would have used something like that in the off season on top of other things. But unless you're 330 pounds, I don't really know what the point is there.
Yeah, I don't either. I've never. I have seen people use it sometimes in the off season, like in spot duty for composition cleanup, like if your body composition. It does seem to have some effect on insulin sensitivity. I've noticed that too. That people, I don't know if you've seen that, but it seems like it improves insulin sensitivity.
The data definitely shows that. In theory, the original data show that it actually changed cholesterol for the positive as well too. I don't really find that to be the case. Again, it was probably a dose thing, or like a study. Not really accurate, but definitely insulin. And is that because it's actually changing the way that works, or is it because it's reducing fat, right? So we know that when body fat gets like about 15, there's some sort of level of inflammation, and then it keeps getting worse, right? And we've all seen that if you've, in the off season, if you put on some serious just weight, you really don't use the food the same anymore. Like any additional weight just goes to fat, right? You're not getting any mass at that point.
Yeah, I mean the whole P ratio thing, where the fatter you get, the more proportionally, the more of the weight gain is fat. That's why I tell guys to get super lean and then work their way back.
Yeah, and like you say, the rebound is like the most anabolic part of the year, right? Right after.
Yeah, I see guys make as much gains in 6 weeks as they will the whole rest of the year post show.
So what did you do after your show last year? How much did you do?
I ran very low doses. I just ran 500 milligrams of test and 300 or 150 milligrams of MPP.
And how much weight did you gain immediately after?
GH, I put on like 40 pounds in 8 weeks.
And because you were ripped.
Yeah.
And you can use it correctly, right? Guys don't understand it.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. Like this whole reverse dieting on a show thing is just, I think to me, it's just monumentally stupid too. I'll go right straight to back to an off-season diet with good food when your body's going to be the most anabolic it'll ever be, and insulin sensitive, and probably myostatin's low from being starved
or at least it's not necessarily impacting it, right? Because myostatin is another one that we're really not sure about. Is myostatin is not necessarily the whole story. Because if you ever look at charts of myostatin, it's interesting how it goes up. Like day 50 in all mammals, it's elevated, right? Its Tren does it slightly more than testosterone, but it's elevated in all animals, humans included. Like literally by like day 50, it's like week 6, it's just up, right? And then the theory was that you're really just at that point, you're not actually stimulating any new synthesis. You basically just flip to this anti-catabolic thing. So any weight you gain after 6 weeks is just anti-catabolism. I don't really think that's the full story, and I don't think myostatin is really what's doing all that. Myostatin seems to have more of an effect, in utero than it does when you're developing, not so much like as an adult.
Yeah, it's always been sort of the holy grail of bodybuilding. Like nothing has ever come from it.
No, and they can't really, and I don't think you'd actually want to block it. I don't know any good that would come out of blocking that, because other things will grow as well.
Yeah, cancer.
Yeah.
Cancer. All right, Kurt. Well, I appreciate you digging into this, man. We'll get your contact information in the description below. Is there anywhere you want people to reach out to you? Anything you want to plug?
My Instagram is kurt.havens. My website should be up shortly. I'll put it in the comment section within the next week.
Okay, we'll get it up there. And folks, give Kurt a follow on Instagram. He's one of the smartest guys I know. He has some really insightful stuff he posts up about anabolics, and he's researching this stuff currently. And this is what he does. And thank you for watching, folks. Take care.
Thanks.
For coaching or consultations, head over to www.anabolicbodybuilding.com to book your spot today. I can help you with optimizing hormones, fat loss, muscle gain, physique, athletic performance, nutrition, and health. For more information, shoot me an email at bigp3rd@gmail.com.